Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar.
And I'm Yuxin.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires. Yet for the next couple of months, we will be discussing the greatest disaster in the history of the Imperium of Man. That's right, folks. The Horus Heresy.
Indeed. Now this will be interesting because instead of covering a particular faction, we'll be following a timeline. Starting from the Great Crusade, we will end at the Siege of Terra.
That's right. But before we start, if you like our stuff, feel free to follow, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like our boxes, feel free to join our membership program, like Sir Bendermite, our very first member.
Quite right, brother. And thank you, Sir Binder Benteen. Well, what are we going to talk about today, Zekthar?
Well, this week we'll be discussing the guy who started the whole thing, Horus Lupercal.
Yes. Well, when Horus was scattered, his pod landed on the world of Chthoniya, a planet close to the Sol system. He was discovered by the Chthonian gang overlord Kagadon and given the no-name of Nergui. Growing up for a time under Kagadon's gang, Nergui engaged in the perpetual gang warfare beneath Chthoniya's surface that dominated the world. However, his life changed dramatically when he came upon the pod he had arrived on at Chthoniya, now being excavated by the Mechanicum. You see, in the inner gangs, the strange pod that Horus was pulled from meant very little, so Kagadon had left it behind. Nergui engaged in battle with the tech priests, killing one and recovering its weapon before running back to Kagadon. Kagadon scolded Nergui for his recklessness, saying those he killed would chase them back to their tribal lair. Kagadon refused to give Nergui his kill name over the incident, much to the young ganger's anger. However, just as Kagadon predicted, Mechanicum adepts arrived at their tribal hold and began to dig through this from the surface.
Excuse me, brother. Just a quick question here. The kill name. Now, I'm assuming anyways that they get like their true name once they make their kill. That's the whole way that these gangs work.
That would be the correct assumption, in my opinion.
Okay. Now here's my question. Does that mean that everybody's named Nergui who hasn't gotten their kill name yet?
That would be my guess, since it literally translates to no name, because you don't technically have a name until
I have one follow-up question.
Kill name.
How do they tell all these Nerguis apart? Does Kagadon go, "Hey, Nergui," and then he just gets 15 people that turn around and go, "What?"
No, they probably have nicknames. Yo, redhead. Huh?
or they've got numbers. Nergui 1. Yes. Sorry, I just found that kind of amusing. Sorry, carry on, sir.
Yeah, no. With the chamber collapsing around them and most of the gang dying, Kagadon instructed to slay him to earn his kill name. After Nergui performs the act, he suddenly gained buried memories of the galaxy, technology, and himself. Even his body began to swell, seemingly awakened by a trigger. When the tech priests finally arrived into the chamber, a Primarch stood before them. Nergui proclaimed himself Horus Lupercal. According to Horus himself, after his discovery, he was brought from Chthoniya to Terra alongside several of his elderly comrades from the gang world. He landed upon Terra to much fanfare, kneeling before the Emperor and taking an oath to serve him dutifully. Because of this early discovery, Horus grew to be the most powerful among the Primarchs, as he had grown up from a child to an adult at the side of the Emperor. For 30 years, he was the only Primarch to have been discovered. Friendship between the Emperor and Horus grew rapidly, and the Emperor eventually trusted him enough to give him command of the entire force of the Imperium. The Emperor had saved Horus's life at the siege of Rayleigh as they fought back to back. At another battle, Horus repaid this debt when he hacked the arm off of a frenzied orc as it tried to choke the life out of the Emperor on the planet of Goro.
Now, for more about those events on the planet of Goro, listen to my Vox. Horus and the Emperor fight together one last time.
The first of his brother Primarchs Horus was reunited with was Leman Russ, who he regarded as savage and with a degree of hidden jealousy. Despite this, he fervently followed the Emperor's wish to have him get along with Russ and the other Primarchs that will soon be rediscovered.
As the Great Crusade plowed on and more of his brothers were discovered, Horus became the older brother to his siblings. Now, while he got along with some better, like Sanguinius and Fulgrim, than others, like the aforementioned Leman Russ and Angron, they all soon respected him and thought of him as the first among many. One of these reasons was because he was simply the first found. The other was Horus had a knack for the understanding of human psychology. He was able to read people in such a way that he could choose to promote their strengths or exploit their weaknesses. Now, this may seem fairly manipulative, but one of the reasons why he had this understanding was because he actually cared about his brothers, along with the gene sons of his brothers, the Astartes. This is often overlooked for the obviousness of what he becomes in history, a monster. Yet I think a lot of his fall is due to the fact that he cared for his sons and thought his father cared for him and his brothers in the same way. As a leader, there was none better, and his abilities to use his brother's strengths on the battlefield was uncanny. While the Great Crusade pushed outward and more Primarchs were discovered, the Emperor's time became divided, pulled in more and more directions. Horus was often placed in overall strategic command of the Great Crusade, a position in which he proved his skill as a leader time and time again. He quickly won the approval and support of the other Space Marine legions, along with their leaders. Another strange aspect of Horus was he preferred to gain compliance from the worlds they found through diplomatic means, and used the sword as a final option. It was Horus's way to treat the population of newly contacted worlds according to the cultural traditions of each. And this highly successful doctrine was repeated in each of the Imperial expeditionary fleets. Horus believed that to do so would lessen the hostile reaction of opponents who wished to parley. Many a world simply accepted the Imperium as their new masters through this, and the leaders of those planets that refused often found themselves ousted out of office by their comrades. Eventually, the Great Crusade came to its pinnacle, known as the Triumph of Ulanor. Now, if you wish to know more about this moment, feel free to listen to my Vox, the Ulanor Crusade. To make a long story short, the Emperor put on a grand triumph on the planet Ulanor and declared Horus Lupercal the Warmaster of the Imperium. It was a glorious promotion, yet it meant things were changing. No longer would the Emperor be in charge of the Great Crusade. He was leaving that to Horus. And without a second word, the Emperor danced his way back to Holy Terra.
What? He didn't even tell Horus what he was up to?
No, which was a mistake that would haunt the Emperor in the years to come. He did mention to Horus that he might want to rename the 16th Legion the Sons of Horus, in honor of their Primarch and to show his preeminent place amongst the other Primarchs. Horus initially declined this honor, not wishing to be set above his brothers, and so his legion continued as the Luna Wolves for a little while longer. But Horus and the other Primarchs never came to terms with the Emperor's absence. Their hurt feelings over his seeming abandonment of the Great Crusade to pursue a secret project whose purpose he chose not to reveal to his sons laid the seeds of jealousy and resentment that would ultimately blossom into the corruption that began the Horus heresy, amongst other things that we will be getting to in a few minutes. But following his promotion to Warmaster, Horus had solicited the opinions and advice of all of his brother Primarchs on the subject since the honor had been bestowed upon him. Being named Warmaster set him abruptly apart from them and raised him up above his brothers. And there had been some stifled objections and discontent, especially from those Primarchs who felt the title should have been theirs. The Primarchs were as prone to sibling rivalry and petty competition as any group of brothers. Guided by the shrewd political hand of his equerry, Malghurst, Horus had courted his brothers, stilling fears, calming doubts, reaffirming pacts, and generally securing their cooperation. He wanted none to feel slighted or overlooked. He wanted none to think they were no longer listened to. Some, like Sanguinius, Lorgar, and Fulgrim, others, like Angron and Perturbo, had raged biliously at the new order, and it had taken masterful diplomacy on the Warmaster's part to placate their choler and jealousy. A few, like Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson, had been cynically resolved, unsurprised by the turn of events. But others, like Rabute Gilliman, Chagatai Khan, and Rogel Dorn, had simply taken it in stride, accepting the Emperor's decree as the right and obvious choice. Horus had ever been the brightest, the first, and the favorite. They did not doubt his fitness for the role, for none of the Primarchs had ever matched Horus's achievements. It was to these solid, resolved brothers that Horus turned in particular for counsel. Dorn and Gilman both embodied the staunchest and most dedicated imperial qualities, commanding their legion's expeditions with peerless devotion and military genius. Horus desired their approval as a young man might seek the quiet understanding of an older, more accomplished brother. Yet from this moment on, we begin to see the small cracks of Horus's character begin to widen under the strain of total command. But before we get to the fall of Horus, what say you, brother, on Horus as a person, as well as his achievement of becoming the Warmaster?
Well, there's a couple things. One is I find that there's actually something else that popped in my head, which will play in later. But why didn't the Emperor teach him anything when it comes to governorship?
He did. It was just, I think, anyways, it was more of when he taught him that stuff. It was more of along the lines of the back burner, because the whole concept is that we're pushing out into the galaxy. This is all about conquering, right?
Right.
So the aspects of bureaucracy, I think, I think the Emperor did teach Horus some of this, and quite frankly, he wasn't bad at it. It was just like all of a sudden, it's like taking. It would be like taking anyways in Terran 42, let's say a grocery store, and you've got the grocery manager, right? And he's fairly competent in his job anyways of managing all the people under him, and then all of a sudden going, congratulations, now you run the whole district of grocery stores. I mean, he would be able to do some of that stuff, but I think he'd have a lot of holes.
Right.
Just
why didn't he? Here's the other factor. Why didn't then Horus lean more on, for example, Gilliman, who had run basically a mini kingdom?
Well, he does lean on his brothers, especially at the beginning, anyways, quite a bit. But quite frankly, you also got to remember, anyways, each one of these Primarchs had their own expeditionary fleets. So I believe Horus's was the 63rd, right? So it was plowing out ahead anyways. I mean, the triumph of Ulanor was a rare experience where there were 9 Primarchs there. There were only 9 of them, though, because they couldn't get the rest of them there in time for it. That's how far spread out they are. So I hear what you're saying, and yeah, I understand. And to me anyways, yeah, that would make sense. It's like, yeah, bring on Rabute Gilman so he can help out with this. But at the same time, he's got his own wars. He's got his own, places to conquer. I think that's honestly why he didn't bring in more of a trust anyways with his Primarchs. I mean, he does. I don't really discuss this all this much, but he does bring in a bunch of people anyways that do help him with the bureaucracy aspect of it. It's just they're not Primarchs. they're not. Yeah,
they can't run 24/7.
Right.
They don't have the same authority.
Right. That also is a big thing. But an interesting question, by the way. And like I said, I do think anyways he had the skills, and if they had been nurtured a little bit more, he would have done better at it. It's just, like I said, the whole thing is that we're conquering the galaxy. Bureaucracy is kind of in the back burner at the time. But I do actually want to know anyways what you think of Horus himself at this point.
I think at this point he's He's the guy, basically.
He's the Chad, so to speak. I think I'm using that term correctly. I can't often figure out anyways what these kids are talking about, but I believe anyways a Chad is someone anyways that's like the big cheese, right? You don't know.
I have no idea.
Oh, those crazy kids on Terran 42. But yeah, he is kind of the guy. He is, and he's done a great job. He is the hero of the Imperium. Probably the best way to describe him, right?
Yeah, at this point in time, yeah.
I mean, he is Hercules. He's the greatest amongst heroes. And one of the things, though, that I really find interesting about him is that, I mean, like, okay, so if you take, like, the Emperor and then you put him up next to Horus at this point, and this is one of the big problems. If it was a concept of who would I rather follow, the Emperor or Horus, I'd probably go with Horus. I don't know. What would you do?
Well, knowing both of their attributes, it depends.
Now, okay, so hang on half a second, Houston. I'm saying at this point in history. Now, obviously, anyways, we would pick the Emperor 10 times out of 10 because we know what's coming up next. But if it was just at this moment in time, who would you rather follow? The Emperor or Horus?
Probably Horus.
Why?
Because I can see in him more of he sees more value and has more of a connection than the Emperor.
He seems far more human. I kind of agree with you. And not only that, but I mean, it seems like, I mean, he was even beloved by Sanguinius, of all people. That was one of his closest friendships that he kept, which, you know.
I do find it funny how 2 out of the 3 people who are just like, yeah, this is an awesome decision, are Lorgar and Fulgrim.
Well, as we will discuss anyways,
mainly Lorgar.
Well, as we will discuss anyways, Lorgar had plans for Horus. So
yes,
obviously it makes sense why he's like, yeah, let's go with Horus, that guy. But he also was good friends with Fulgrim. I mean, like I mentioned before, anyways, there were a few anyways that he got along with, but I wouldn't really call them friends. Maybe work buddies is probably the better way of describing them. Like, for instance, Lehman Russ or Angron or Lionel Johnson. But he did
maybe
have,
not Angron.
Well, he was a work buddy. that's what I'm saying.
Not really a buddy, more of fellow employee.
Yeah, that's probably a better way of describing it. But he did also have some like really good friendships with some of these guys, like Sanguinius and Fulgrim, and honestly, that becomes kind of his backbone for, and even Rogel Dorn got along fairly well with Horus. I mean, and we'll get to this in a couple of weeks, when when Dorn finds out that Horus has betrayed the Emperor, he doesn't believe it at first. He's just so shocked.
Right.
But we do have to carry on, unless you have something else you wish to mention about Horus.
No, not at this point.
Okay. Now comes the part of the story that is truly sad to speak of: the corruption and fall of the mighty hero Horus. Now, while there are particular events that we will discuss that are as nails in a coffin, there are a few signs that precede them of his falling. The first of these was the simple strain of leading the Great Crusade. As the Imperial Warmaster, Horus took over command of the Great Crusade and accepted his new duties with earnest dedication. However, there was much dissension in the ranks of the Primarchs and other parties in the Imperium over the Emperor's decision to withdraw from the campaign and return to Terra, as well as to reorganize the political administration of the Imperium under the control of the Council of Terra, headed by his regent, Malkador the Sigillite. Only a handful of the Primarchs, amongst them a scheming Lorgar, which we will get to in a minute, remained steadfast beside the Warmaster during this period of conflict. Horus also disagreed with many of the decrees passed by the newly established Council of Terra, a ruling body of imperial nobles and bureaucrats, which were intended to shift the burden of taxation and administration onto the newly conquered imperial compliant worlds.
Why is that?
Well, it makes his job so much harder. Now, okay, remember Yuxin, we kind of briefly talked about how his whole concept was making sure that people understood that their culture would remain amongst the Imperium,
Yeah.
and it's a good idea anyways to join the Imperium. Now, all of a sudden, anyways, the bureaucrats back on Terra are saying, yeah, now once they agree anyways to sign on, you are going to tax the ever-loving crap out of them. Why? To carry on the campaign, because the rest of us don't want to pay for it. This is going to make my job so much harder. You do understand that, right? Well, we don't care.
Not only that, it's even worse because what they're doing is, and this is just a side note, by making it less agreeable for people to comply, more places won't comply, meaning that more resources are going to have to be diverted to actually continuing a war in comparison to how much it would have cost beforehand.
It's like a snake eating its own tail. Right? It's just a never-ending cycle anyways of just this is not a good idea. But and I will,
as you can tell, they chose the best people to run this council.
Obviously, anyways, the Emperor was a little sidetracked anyways with his new project. So he's just like, yeah, whatever. Malcador, you figure it out.
And Malcador was like, I got stuff to do too. These people are here. I guess they'll work.
Okay. I will state anyways, Malcador was a great administrator. The problem
When
here
he
is
was there.
yeah, that's the point. When he was there, he was great at it. But I would also mention anyways that he is, as opposed to all the rest of these guys we're talking about, he is simply human. So like you were saying before, anyways, he doesn't have the energy. He's an old man, Yuxin. He doesn't have the energy anyways to be everywhere at once. And I mean, there are times anyways where it's even mentioned anyways in shock that it's during the Horus Heresy. It's like he's everywhere at once. But that was just, and it slowly almost drives him mad, by the way. That aspect of having to deal with putting out fires everywhere. But when we're not in panic mode.
What popped into my head is, and all of a sudden, Horus would pop up and say, see, now you know what it felt like for me.
You goob. Yeah. The whole structuring, anyways, of the administratum in and of itself, anyways, caused so many problems. And it put Horus and it put the administratum. This is the biggest problem. It put the administratum and put Horus in two different camps. Well, they should have been working together. Instead, what happens is that there is this straight up, just like, this is the dumbest thing anyways I've ever heard of. This doesn't make any sense. While the other group is going, well, we don't want to have to pay for it.
Right.
Instead of figuring out a way to work together, they end up, falling farther and farther apart. And the one guy, anyways, that could have, easily, anyways, with just a simple conversation, dealt with this whole thing, is often his own little secret land underneath the palace.
His own world.
Yeah. I mean, and don't get me wrong, the Webway project, I think, anyways, if that had ever gotten off the ground, would have changed humanity completely. It would have been the winning card. It would have been the ace in the sleeve. But to simply ignore the rest of the players around the poker table is just foolhardy, in my opinion. But that's my opinion.
Well, in my opinion, he should have stopped progressing the Great Crusade, start consolidating everything, and actually solidifying it so that there's actually time to do the extra work.
Interesting you say that, because we're going to get to part of that here in a minute, and I'm going to ask you about it here. But we do have to move on.
Right.
Now, the newly formed administratum was a heavy burden to the new Warmaster. While he was a brilliant tactician and a great leader on the battlefield, his leadership, when it came to the mountains of paperwork and dealing with the mulings of lesser men, was found wanting. It seemed the harder and harder he fought against the bureaucracy, the more he drowned in it. Even worse was he knew it. And because he was not excelling in it, Horus came to believe in his heart that he was failing his father. Now, speaking of his father, the second problem was he was deeply wounded that the Emperor had revealed to none of the Primarchs, not even him, his most favored son, why he had secluded himself upon Terra, and the truth behind his secret Imperial Webway project. As the Crusade plowed on, Horus had less and less contact with the Emperor, and soon his brain began to work the problem of why he had been excluded from his father's trust. Why didn't his father trust him? This was a question he couldn't wrap his head around for a time, and then solutions came to him. Dark solutions. Perhaps the Emperor didn't think Horus was worthy of his trust. Maybe because the Emperor didn't think him worthy. His father was realizing he didn't need him. And if the Emperor, his father, didn't need him, then perhaps his secret was replacing the Warmaster, his favorite son. These thoughts swirled in the Warmaster's head and slowly began to take further root until he discarded them with a firm resolve of his duty. No, he was his father's finest. That's why he put him in charge, because he trusted him to get the job done. Yet these dark suspicions only retreated to the recesses of his mind, patiently waiting for him to be more vulnerable, and then return in a new torrent of despair. The final concern was what would become of him, his brothers, and his gene sons after the Great Crusade. It was something that he discussed with his Mournival from time to time to get their opinion.
Pardon me, brother. You mind if I give a brief interlude as to who the Mournival are? They are an interesting dynamic in this story.
None at all, brother. Carry on.
Well, the Mournival was the advisory council of 4 Space Marine captains of the Luna Wolves that served their Primarch and Warmaster Horus as advisors and close companions throughout the Great Crusade until the start of the Horus Heresy. In the last days of the Great Crusade, the Mournival was composed of 4 of the most famed officers of the Luna Wolves. First Captain Ezekiel Abaddon of the First Company, Captain Horus Littlehus Examond of the Fifth Company.
Pardon me, brother. Why is he called Little Horus?
Because he looks like a smaller version of the Grand Warmaster Horus Lupercal.
Oh, so he almost looks like a clone.
Except for smaller.
So unfortunately, he can't do the same thing anyways that Alfarius did with his regiments, where he could, sneak his way through things anyways because everybody looked like him. Sorry. Carry on, sir. Who else was in the Mournival?
We had Captain Tarek Torgadon of the Second Company and Captain Garviel Loken of the 10th Company. Horus had selected these men in particular for their ideas and character, and often used them as a sounding board on what he wished to do next. These meetings were always in private, and is very well documented by scribe Dan Abnett, who pulled them from excerpts of Garviel Loken. Not only were they his advisors, one might say they were all even friends. Even Abaddon, who was quite brisk and direct, and Garviel, who was quiet and thoughtful, had a friendship, even though it was definitely strained.
Speaking of Loken, perhaps we get back to the catalyst of Horus's betrayal?
We're going to talk about Erebus now, aren't we?
Well, we kind of have to. Tell you what, brother. How about we keep his concept in this Vox brief, and I'll do a short Vox on the bugger later on.
Sounds wonderful. The less we have to discuss him, the better.
Agreed. Yes. Well, the start of this whole thing takes place on the homeworld of the Interrex. The Interrex were a highly advanced interstellar human civilization that existed across some 30 star systems at the time of the Great Crusade in the 31st millennium. The Interrex, unlike the Imperium of Man, had decided the best way to deal with intelligent alien species was not to exterminate them or make war upon them, but to try to coexist with them. In fact, The Indirects had become the close allies and nominal overlords of the simian alien species called the Kainbrach, who they had integrated into their own society. The Indirects were suspicious of Horus and the 63rd Expedition Fleet during their first meeting. They had long ago learned of the deities of chaos, and these fierce barbaric humans looked very much like the worshippers of chaos. Yet through negotiations, the Indirects were eased of their suspicions and invited Horus and a guard company back to their home world to discuss what to do next. Now, knowing Horus, I'm sure they might have found a peaceful alternative to war.
But then Erebus mucks the whole thing up. I hate that guy. I swear, brother, we should do the universe a favor and hunt the blackguard down and his miserable life. The fact that he is still alive after all these years is an affront to intelligent races everywhere.
Can I finish?
Yes, my apologies. I just need to get that out. I really hate that guy.
No need to apologize, Yuxin. I hate the fellow myself. He is truly a terrible person. But my brother is correct. Erebus snuck onto the planet and then into the museum called
The Hall of Devices.
a museum on the Interx world of Zenobia, dedicated to the weaponry in the city of Zenobia's Principes, and stealing a prized Kandrak blade called the Anathame that was known to have links to chaos. To cover his tracks, he blew up the museum and made his escape, and nobody knew the wiser. The Indirects naturally accused the Luna Wolves and Horus of treachery and attempted to capture the Primarch and his bodyguard. Horus naturally fought his way off, and Garvel Loken gave a great description of it that I quote, "Of all the battles Loken had fought at his commander's side, that was the fiercest, the saddest, the most vicious. Teeth bared in the firefight, swinging his blade at the foe on all sides. Horus seemed more noble than Loken had ever known. He would remember that moment years later, when fate had played its cruel trick and sense had turned upside down. He would remember Horus, Warmaster, in that narrow fire-lit street, defining the honor and unyielding courage of the Imperium of Man. There should have been frescoes painted, poems written, symphonies composed, all to celebrate that instant when Horus made his most absolute statement of devotion to the throne and to his father. Unfortunately, the Interrex civilization was ultimately wiped out by the Luna Wolves following the commencement of hostilities between the two human factions on the night Erebus stole the Anathame. The reason for the deception and the stealing of the blade was soon revealed when the Luna Wolves were called to Davin at the request of the Word Bearers Legion. Erebus, the first chaplain of the Word Bearers, who was accompanying the Luna Wolves as a representative of his legion, had told Horus of how the Imperial commander he had left behind as Davin's planetary governor, Eugene Timba, had turned traitor. Enraged that a man he had considered a friend and had personally recommended would turn on the Emperor, Horus attacked Davin's moon himself with a spearhead of 400 Luna Wolf Astartes, 3 Titans of the Legio Mortis, including the infamous Imperator-class Titan Dias Irae, and 4,000 troops drawn from the Byzantine Janissaries regiment of the Imperial Army. Heavy tanks could not be deployed, as mysteriously the deserts which had once dominated the moon's terrain had transformed into plague-ridden swamps, filled with the reanimated zombie-like corpses of the Imperial Army soldiers Horus had left behind on Davin with Timba. Horus led an assault. Horus led an assault into Timba's lair, inside his massive downed Imperial starship called
The Glory of Terror.
While Horus and 200 of his Astartes were inside, the mighty ship's remaining superstructure collapsed, cutting Horus off from the rest of his warriors. Alone now, Horus made his way through the bowels of the ruined starship in search of Timba. He found the Imperial commander on the bridge of the ship, just as he killed Verulam Moy, one of Horus's captains. Horus killed the horrifically mutated Timba, but was struck by the Kainbrach Anathame. a chaos-tainted xenos sword in the process, the weapon that Erebus had stolen from the Interrex and given to Timba before the Luna Wolves arrived. The Anathame, an artifact sacred to Nurgle, the chaos god of disease and despair. As you can see, I was getting there. But anyways, poisoned Horus until he was unable to walk and came close to death. The Mournival rushed him back up to his flagship to save the Primarch's life. Unable to cure Horus of the supernatural chaos toxin injected by the Anathame using Imperial Medicae technology, the Luna Wolves Warrior Lodge, now 300 strong, decided to bear Horus to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge on Davin. As Erebus, long a secret devotee of the ruinous powers, like the rest of his legion, told the Luna Wolves it was a house of healing. Erebus then convinced the officers of the Sons of Horus Warrior Lodge to allow him to take the Warmaster to a secret sect on Davin's moon and use sorcery at this temple of the Serpent Lodge in order to treat Horus. The creation of the Warrior Lodge within the Luna Wolves and many other Space Marine legions based on the lodges used by the savage warriors of Davin had been another of Lorgar and Erebus's ploy to infiltrate and corrupt the Astartes into turning against the Emperor across the decades. However, not all Astartes and legions joined the lodges, as many saw them as a direct violation of the Emperor's desire that all Space Marines dedicate themselves to truth and openness with others and among themselves. The lodges would prove to be the primary purveyors of corruption in those legions which turned traitor in the days immediately preceding the start of the Horus heresy. Those Astartes within those legions, lodges which held themselves aloof from the secret organizations, were marked as Imperial loyalists, who would later be betrayed at Esfand III. The Serpent Lodge on Davin was in truth a chaos cult, and using sorcery, which was outlawed by the Emperor, the cultists managed to warp the mind of the Warmaster against the Emperor by playing on the seed of resentment that he felt for his father after the Emperor had left the Great Crusade behind to return to Terra. During the dark rituals that followed within the temple, Horus's spirit was transferred from his body into the Immaterium. There he bore witness to a nightmare vision of the future. He saw the Imperium of Man as a repressive, violent theocracy, where the Emperor and several of his Primarchs, but not Horus, were worshipped as gods by the masses. While this vision of the Imperial future granted by the Chaos Gods was a true one, it was ironically an outcome largely created by the Warmaster's own actions. The Dark Gods betrayed themselves as victims of the Emperor's psychic might and claimed that they had no real interest in the happenings of the material world. Yet again, he shows up, Magnus the Red, the Sorcerer's Primarch of the Thousand Suns Legion, had also traveled into the warp via sorcery to try to stop Horus from turning to chaos. Magnus explained that the Warmaster's vision was only one amongst many possible futures, but one that Horus alone could prevent. But Horus, with all those doubts and fears in his mind, would not listen to his brother. The shocking truth that he saw gave his fears more to prey on, and soon his fears turned to wrath as it became clear to him. The Emperor did not love him. He was just another tool to be discarded when another one that suited his father came to be. His gene sons, disposable. His brothers, more tools to the massive machine known as the Empire of Man. How dare he? After all they had sacrificed and all the blood they had spilled in his name, he truly wished to be just a god, like those four that came to him. His father had lied. The imperial truth was nothing but horrific falsity. Magnus pleaded with his brother to see reason, but Horus would have none of it, silencing his brother with scorn. If he truly believed his father and trusted him, then why did he continue to use sorcery against the will of his father and his Edict of Nicaea? The Chaos Gods' pact with Horus was simple. Give us the Emperor, and we will give you the galaxy. Driven by his anger, desire for power, and wrath at what he saw as his father's abandonment of him, Horus accepted the ruinous powers' offer. They healed his grievous wounds and filled him with the powers of the warp. Renouncing his oath to the Emperor, Horus led his legion into the worship of the myriad chaos gods in the form of chaos undivided. He then sought to turn many of his fellow Primarchs to the service of chaos and succeeded with Angron of the World Eaters, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, and Mortarion of the Death Guard, who were the first of many to follow, along with many regiments of the Imperial Army and several Titan legions of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Yet, some of these legions remained true to the Emperor, and he would have to do something about that, which we will get to next week with Esfon 3. But before we go, what do you think of this tragic story of the fall of perhaps the Empire of Man's greatest hero, Yuxin?
First off, Erebus should burn forever.
Yes.
He really is just a terrible person. Just the fact that he's still around honestly irks me. Now, I know anyways you mentioned we should just go hunting down and kill him, but I have to remind you, like you reminded me anyways, when Vulcan showed up at our doorstep, that we can't really change things in this galaxy. We're just here to record.
Right.
But if not so, that would be probably first amongst our list is to kill Erebus, yes?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. But anyways, this isn't about Erebus. This is about Horus.
One of the things I find funny is when you're talking about it, they'll decide to use sorcery to fix them.
Yep.
Something that, as he even mentions when he's having his conversation in the warp with Magnus, is supposed to be not done.
Yep. What's your point?
My point is the fact that I find it interesting how they're going, okay, we'll try to save him with something that shouldn't be used.
So I might have glossed over that a little bit. I mean, okay, you mentioned anyways, the Mournival were friends of Horus. And the concept anyways of their friend, the Warmaster, dying. Two of the Mournival anyways would do anything to save his life. That would have been Abaddon and Horus. Axamon, little Horus. They would do anything to save his life. Now, this actually comes to a point, it's actually fairly interesting anyways with the Mournival, because two of them flatly refused because they said, this is sorcery. And
right.
As you just mentioned, Yuxin, they were just like, but the Emperor said we can't use that. Sorcery is bad. And the other two literally were just like, we don't care. And they almost literally came to blows on it. And like the whole
region, they didn't persevere. Huh?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. If I recall right. By the way, this is all documented. This whole thing is documented by scribe Graham McNeil in his book called False Gods. But when it gets to that point anyways, and it's literally anyways, half the Luna Wolves are on one side anyways, saying that we need to do everything we possibly can to save Horus. And the other side going, what you're doing is completely and utterly wrong. We need to stop you. And they almost literally come to blows. And then the doors of this lodge literally shut. And there's no way to open them from the outside. So I guess in theory, if they really wanted to stop this thing, yes, the Luna Wolves that were against it, they could have used Titans and blasted the lodge out of existence. But could you imagine doing that to your friend? I couldn't. I mean, are you that convicted anyways of this aspect? I would have a hard time doing that personally.
Well, one of the things that would concern me is that as soon as it was locked, going, why are they locking it? That would start some red lights going off in the back of my head. It's like they're locking it. Why are they locking it?
Well, when the door is shut, even Horus Axamon anyways, he looks back anyways, and he starts to get kind of wide-eyed, and he's like, what have we done? I mean, at that point anyways, yeah, and Horus, by the way, Horus Axamon is a very interesting character. He does end up turning traitor, but he's like the regretful traitor. It's just along the lines of, we really shouldn't be doing this, guys. Well, but it's just such a small voice. And the rest of the group.
Well, he is little Horus.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, the fall of Horus, I think, is probably the story of the fall of Horus is probably one of the. It reminds me actually of Terran 42's like Greek tragedies. It is truly, anyways, every hero must fall. There is no happy ending in any of those. Even as if I mentioned before, anyways, Hercules. I mean, his story doesn't end too terribly well. Or Achilles. Achilles, the greatest.
Achilles might be the better choice because I assume more people know how that turns out in comparison to Hercules.
Right. Well, and not only that, but Achilles, amongst his noble warriors of the Greeks, anyways, was the first amongst many. He was the greatest of them all. And in the end, anyways, his own problems ended up being his downfall.
And then he got shot in the heel and died.
Yeah, I mean, Achilles is its own story, and maybe we'll do a Vox on Achilles and the Siege of Troy. That might actually be fairly interesting, Yuxin. But getting back to Horus. Horus, one of the things I've always liked about Horus is that he is very human. I mean, he has a lot of the same flaws that the rest of humanity does. He has pride. He has courage, though. He has affinity towards his man, and love, anyways, for the people that follow him. I mean, he is a great leader, but then he starts to fail on the aspect, anyways, of what makes a great leader. Now, real quick, anyways, Yuxin, I'm going to give you, anyways, my thoughts on what a great leader is. But what is your thoughts, anyways, on what a great leader is?
Has to be somebody who can be compassionate, but at the same time ruthless when necessary.
Yes. I would also say, anyways, that a great leader, anyways, thinks of he's thinking of the outcome of how to, advance, but at the same time, he is also thinking of the people under him.
Right.
He fights for the people under him. The people under him, anyways, he understands, anyways, is what makes the machine work.
And lets them know before tootling off.
Now, Yuxin. We're talking about Horus. We can't end every single one of these boxes about the Horus heresy on the blunders of the emperor. We just can't do it.
Well, we can, because it is his blunders that caused it.
True. Well, yes and no.
Well, that with the assistance of the ever so wonderful Erebus.
Yes. Well, we can't lay this all at the feet of the emperor. We just can't. Horus, honestly, anyways, is the reason why this whole thing starts. I mean, yes, he might have felt slighted by his father, but the decisions that he makes after that, anyways, truly is what starts the Horus heresy. You can't blame other people for your own actions. That's a slippery slope. So, I mean, and I think, anyways, one of the big things, though, is that Horus starts to lose the aspect of why he's a great leader. It starts to fall along the lines, anyways, of pride and resentment against the emperor. He's no longer thinking of his own people. He's thinking, anyways, of like, well, I'm hurting because I think that the emperor, anyways, has failed me. Well, not failed me, but he has lied to me. That's where the metal meets the meat. And he stops thinking. I mean, because he could have chosen so many options at this point, and a lot of them, anyways, could have been insurrection without the whole chaos thing added to it. I mean, he very much could have been just like, what? No, I don't like what the emperor's doing, and yes, I'm going to start a civil war. But the whole concept behind it isn't because I want chaos. I want to start my own empire.
Well,
Now,
then though he'd be following the same sort of aspects of Alpharius and Omega.
yeah, he would have to be thinking outside of the box. But now I can see also why though that he agreed to this pact anyways with Chaos, because he didn't understand the true nature of what the Chaos entities were, the deities were.
Right.
He's just looking at them as a power source. And he's like, well, I'm going
Right.
to need all the power I can get anyways if I'm going to go toe-to-toe with my dad.
Yeah.
You know, he's thinking of him as more along the lines of like a gun as opposed to, you know, what they really are.
Well, you know, one of his alternatives could have been, where can I find a really big orc?
Yes, Yuxin, that would have gone over well. That would have gone over swimmingly. Are you kidding me? That never would have. Why do you think that would work? just humor me. Why do you think that would work?
So long as he is able to get the Emperor to a place where it would be even worse if he came across a Cork. But
he might be able to get away with it with a Quark.
Yeah,
as long as their concepts were aligned, and then that would be a really weird world. They would split the they'd split the galaxy in half. Half of it would be for orcs, and half of it would be for humans. that would be really weird. It
would have been better than what happened, wouldn't it?
It would. Well, on that sad note, folks, that'd be it for this week. Join us next week as we discuss the first true act of betrayal by Horus, Esvon 3.
Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this box. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And don't forget to check out the shop. We got some cool stuff there, like clothes, pillows, and hats.
Oh, and don't forget rabbits, Yuxin.
Right. And don't forget the rabbits.
Have a great day. And as always,
Until next time, this is Ekthar,
And Yuxin.
signing off.